Every night the millionaire showed up at the same cafe. The waitress thought it was just because of the cake. But one sentence changed everything. "I don't come for the dessert." What he revealed made her heart race. What do you think will happen in this story? Comment and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. In the silent early mornings of Sandpoint, when the historic cobblestone streets rested under the dew, the seaside cafe remained like a lit beacon amid the darkness. Nestled between colonial houses, the small establishment was the only one that kept its doors open all night, serving as a refuge for fishermen who left early for the sea, sleepless tourists, and residents with thoughts too heavy for sleep. It was precisely at 1:15 in the morning, with the punctuality of a Swiss watch, that Thomas Reynolds appeared at the door. A man in his 40s, prematurely grey hair, reading glasses hanging from the pocket of his always well-pressed shirt, even at that hour. It didn't matter if the sky poured down in a storm or if the summer heat punished the coastal town. He never missed his nightly commitment. "The usual, Mr. Reynolds?" asked Rachel Newman, the waitress on the night shift, although she already knew the answer. With an automatic movement, she positioned the cup for black coffee without sugar and cut a slice of still warm cornbread. "Yes, thank you," he invariably responded with a polite but distant smile, as if part of him were elsewhere in another time. Thomas always chose the same table, next to the window overlooking the sea. From there he watched the gentle movement of the waves and the starry sky while writing in a black-covered notebook. No one knew exactly what he wrote so much about, but everyone respected his space and solitude. It was almost an unspoken agreement. Among the night frequenters, that corner belonged to him as if it were part of the cafe's furniture. Rachel, with her recently completed 30 years, worked the night shift by choice. She found that the silence of the night gave her space to think, to escape the gazes and comments that had followed her since she returned to her hometown 2 years ago. Before that, she had been a promising visual artist in Portland, with works that were beginning to gain recognition in the Pearl District galleries. Until everything collapsed in a single night. "You never put sugar in your coffee," she remarked on a particularly quiet early morning when only Thomas occupied the establishment. It was the first time she broke the protocol of discretion she maintained with him. Thomas raised his eyes from the notebook, slightly surprised by the observation. "I learned to appreciate the bitterness," he replied, slowly closing the notebook. "Sometimes the most authentic things in life don't need to be sweetened." Rachel nodded, understanding more than he imagined. "Like your cornbread. You prefer it without syrup, without topping, just the bread." "Exactly," Thomas observed her, more carefully for the first time. He noticed the almost imperceptible blue paint stains on her slender fingers, the observant gaze that seemed to catalogue every detail around her. "You're not just a waitress, are you?" She hesitated, suddenly, feeling exposed. "What gave me away, the paint stains?" "That and the way you observe people. You look at them as if you were studying forms, contours. It's an artist's gaze." The comment disarmed her. It had been a long time since anyone had seen her that way, as an artist. It was a title she herself had abandoned. "I used to paint," she admitted in a low voice, "but that was in another life." The conversation could have ended there, with each returning to their comfortable silence. But that night the sky over Sandpoint poured down in a violent storm, the kind that makes the sea advance over the stone streets and transform sidewalks into small rivers. Thomas, who would normally leave at 3 o'clock sharp, remained in the cafe, observing the fury of nature through the window. "I guess we're stuck here for a while," commented Rachel, placing a mug of hot chocolate in front of him, without him having asked for it. "On the house, nights like this call for something more comforting than coffee." Thomas accepted the drink with a nod of thanks. The storm had cut the town's electricity, and the cafe was illuminated only by a few candles and lanterns strategically positioned, creating an almost magical atmosphere. "Have you always worked here?" he asked, breaking his own rule of not initiating conversations. "No, I came back to Sandpoint 2 years ago. Before that, I lived in Portland, trying to be an artist." She emphasized the word "trying" with a note of bitterness. "And you? Have you always lived in Sandpoint?" "No, I arrived 3 years ago. I came to escape the noise of Seattle." He hesitated, as if carefully choosing his words. "I needed a quieter place to raise my daughter." "You have a daughter?" The surprise was genuine. In 2 years of observing Rachel had never seen him accompanied. "Mia, she's 9 now. And she stays alone while you come here in the early morning?" A sad smile crossed Thomas's face. "No, my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, stays with her when I need to go out. But Mia is already asleep at this hour. I always return before she wakes up." A lightning bolt cut across the sky, briefly illuminating Thomas's face. In that fleeting instant, Rachel saw something that intrigued her, an expression of deep pain, the kind that time cannot completely erase. "Why do you always come here at the same time?" The question escaped before she could contain it. Thomas remained silent for so long that Rachel thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. "This cafe was where I met my wife, Isabella. She was a history teacher, specialized in the colonial period. She came to Sandpoint for research on the region's sugar mills. I was writing my second novel." He paused, taking a sip of the chocolate. "She walked into this cafe at 1:15 in the morning, soaked by the rain, exactly as it's raining now." The coincidence made Rachel shiver. "And now you come here every night at the same time. To remember, to not forget." He took a deep breath. "To somehow keep her alive." The silence that followed had weight, density. For the first time, Rachel understood that the solitary man at the corner table carried much more than a notebook. Of notes, he carried an entire story of love and loss that refused to end. "Did she like cornbread?" Rachel asked softly. Thomas's eyes glistened with contained tears. "How did you know?" "It's the only bread you eat, and it always seems ritualistic." On that stormy night, the walls they had both built around themselves began silently to crumble. They didn't know yet, but that conversation would be the first step in a journey that would change their lives forever. On the other side of town, protected from the storm, little Mia woke up startled in her room. She looked at the photograph on the nightstand, a smiling woman with curly hair, and whispered, "Mom, I think Dad is finally going to find someone who understands us." After the night of the storm, something subtle had changed in the routine of the seaside cafe. Thomas continued to arrive punctually at 1:15 in the morning, sitting at the same table by the window, but now exchanged a few words with Rachel beyond the usual order. They were brief conversations about the weather, about the town, about the tourists who flooded Sandpoint during the literary festivals. Nothing deep, but it was a start. What Thomas didn't know was that Rachel had begun to pay special attention to the cornbread. She had studied the old recipe that Mrs. Carter, the cafe owner, kept with care. She learned to get the exact consistency of the dough, to let it rest for the necessary time so it would be moist inside and slightly crispy outside. It was her silent way of saying she understood the significance of that ritual for him. One Saturday morning, as Rachel was leaving her night shift, tired but satisfied with having finished a new batch of breads, she came across an unusual scene in Sandpoint's central square. A little girl with curly hair, tied in 2 misaligned braids, sitting on a bench, drawing intently in a notebook very similar to Thomas's. It didn't take much imagination to know who she was. "You're Mia, Aunt." "You?" Rachel asked, approaching cautiously. The girl raised her eyes, suspicious. She had the same greenish-brown eyes as her father, but there was something different in them, a vivid curiosity that Thomas seemed to have lost. "How do you know my name?" The childish voice carried a precocious seriousness. "Your father comes to the cafe where I work." Mia's expression immediately transformed. "You're the lady from the night cafe, the one who makes the cornbread he brings home sometimes?" Rachel smiled, surprised to be recognized. "That's me, Rachel. Dad said you make the bread exactly like—" Mia stopped, biting her lower lip, as if she had said too much. "Like your mom used to make," completed Rachel gently. The girl nodded, suddenly shy. She closed her drawing notebook. but not before Rachel could glimpse what appeared to be the portrait of a woman with curly hair, smiling. "Can I see what you're drawing?" asked Rachel, sitting next to her on the bench. After a moment of hesitation, Mia opened the notebook again. It was in fact a portrait of her mother, done with a surprising skill for a 9-year-old child. The proportions, the expression, the details of the face, all captured with an impressive artistic sensitivity. "You have a lot of talent," commented Rachel, genuinely admiring. "Have you been drawing for a long time?" "Forever. Dad says I take after my mom. She used to draw too." Mia turned a few pages of the notebook, showing other drawings: Sandpoint Square, the sea, fishermen's boats, the large house where they lived. "But Dad doesn't like it much. When I draw Mom, it makes him sad." "It's difficult for him," said Rachel, careful with her words. "Sometimes when we love someone very much and that person leaves, even good memories can hurt." "But I don't want to forget what she was like," protested Mia, with a determination that surprised Rachel. "I'm afraid of waking up one day and not remembering her face anymore, her voice." The sincerity of that child touched Rachel deeply. "Can I tell you a secret? Artists have a superpower. We can keep people and moments forever through art. Each time you draw your mother, you're keeping her alive in a special way." Mia's eyes sparkled. "Are you an artist too?" Rachel hesitated. "I was. Now I'm more of a waitress who sometimes scribbles things." "Why?" The direct question, typical of children, caught Rachel off guard. How to explain to a 9-year-old girl about rejection, failure, and the cruelty of the artistic world? "Let's say I lost my courage," she finally replied. "Sometimes adults are also afraid of certain things." "My dad lost the courage to write," said Mia, with wisdom beyond her years. "He was famous, you know. He wrote beautiful books. I have them all hidden under my bed because he stored the copies in the attic and thinks I don't know." This revelation intrigued Rachel. "Your father is a writer?" "He was, Thomas Reynolds. Haven't you heard of him?" The name finally made sense in Rachel's mind. Thomas Reynolds, author of September Tides and The Silence of Shells novels, acclaimed by critics that had marked contemporary American literature. 5 years ago, at the height of his career, he simply disappeared from the literary scene, ignoring awards, invitations to lectures, and readers' clamor for new books. "I have all his books," confessed Rachel, remembering the pile of novels she kept in her small apartment at the back of the cafe. "I never imagined he was your Mr. Reynolds from the cafe." "He doesn't like people to know," explained Mia. "When we moved to Sandpoint, he asked me never to tell anyone he was a writer. He said he wanted to be just Mia's dad here." At that moment, the bell of the town's main church rang 9 times, announcing the hour. Mia jumped up. "I have to go. Dad's going to wake up soon and can't know I went out alone to draw in the square." "It'll be our secret," promised Rachel. "But be careful walking alone around town, even if Sandpoint is quiet." Mia smiled, a smile that lit up her face in a way that reminded Rachel of the photographs of Isabella she had seen in reports about Thomas years ago. "Could you teach me to draw better?" "Oh," asked the girl hesitantly. "I have some paints at home, but I don't know how to use them properly." The sincere request touched something dormant in Rachel. "Maybe, if your father allows it." "He'll allow it," guaranteed Mia, with surprising confidence. "He likes you. He said you have eyes that see beyond." Before Rachel could process this information, Mia was already running across the square, her notebook pressed against her chest, braids swinging in the wind. That same afternoon, while tidying her small room at the back of the seaside cafe, Rachel was surprised by a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found Thomas, looking uncomfortable yet determined. "Mia told me you two met this morning," he said without preamble, "and that you offered drawing lessons." Yes, but I said only if you permitted," explained Rachel, nervous about the possibility of having crossed some boundary. "She has a lot of talent, Thomas." The use of his first name, without the usual Mr. that marked the distance between them at the cafe, didn't go unnoticed. "I know she does," he replied, softening his expression. "She takes after her mother. Isabella was an architect, but her true passion was freehand drawings, especially of historical buildings. There was a moment of silence, loaded with unshared memories. "I don't write anymore," said Thomas abruptly. "Mia must have told you. She talks too much sometimes. She admires you very much. She keeps your books like treasures." A sad smile passed over his face. "I couldn't continue after Isabella left. The words simply dried up." "What do you write in that notebook every night, then?" The question escaped before Rachel could contain it. "Letters," replied Thomas after a long silence. "Letters to Isabella. Letters that will never be sent, never be read. It's the only thing I can still write." The confession, so intimate and painful, created a new bond between them. Rachel understood then that Thomas's nightly ritual at the cafe was much more than a remembrance. It was his way of maintaining a dialogue with the absence, of preserving the connection with the woman he had loved. "About the drawing lessons for Mia," continued Thomas, changing the subject, "I think it would be good for her. She needs a female presence in her life, someone who understands this artistic sensitivity she inherited from her mother, and that I, as much as I try, cannot fully nurture." "I would love to," replied Rachel, feeling a responsibility that went beyond simply teaching drawing techniques. "But I need to be honest with you, Thomas. It's been years since I've seriously touched paintbrushes. I don't know if I'm the most suitable person." "You are exactly the suitable person," interrupted Thomas, with a certainty that surprised her. "Because you understand what it's like to have art dormant within you. Perhaps you two can awaken this in each other." When Thomas said goodbye, promising to bring Mia for the first lesson the following afternoon, Rachel closed the door and leaned against it, heart racing. For the first time in years, she felt a tingling in her fingertips, that familiar restlessness that, in the past, only calmed down when she transferred to the canvas the images that bubbled in her mind. That night, hours before her shift at the cafe began. Rachel opened a dusty box she kept under the bed. Inside, brushes hardened by time, dried paint tubes, palettes stained with long-forgotten colors. She touched each item with reverence, like someone who reunites with old friends. In his apartment in the historic part of town, Thomas watched Mia sleep, the drawing notebook still clutched to her chest. On the nightstand, a portrait of Isabella seemed to smile with approval. For the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to think that perhaps, just perhaps, there was room in their lives for something beyond longing. The first drawing lesson took place on the back porch of the Seaside Cafe, a small but cozy space that Mrs. Carter had offered with enthusiasm when she learned of the project. The 70-year-old lady, with her white hair always tied in an impeccable bun, had a special affection for Rachel since she had welcomed her 2 years ago, offering not just a job, but also the small room at the back of the establishment. "This girl needs to start painting again," Mrs. Carter commented to Thomas, as they watched Rachel prepare the materials for the lesson. "Since she arrived here, she carries a sadness in her eyes that only art can heal." Thomas nodded, perfectly understanding what the lady meant. He recognized in Rachel the same emptiness that he himself carried, the emptiness of someone who abandons their vocation, who silences their own voice. Mia arrived carrying not only her drawing notebook, but also a carved wooden box, visibly old and well-maintained. "I found it in the attic, hidden behind Dad's books," she explained, placing the box on the table. "They were Mum's." Rachel opened the box carefully. Inside were high-quality brushes, imported watercolors, professional colored pencils, a complete set that revealed Isabella's investment in her art. "Your mother was very talented," commented Rachel, handling the materials with reverence. "Dad said I can use them, said Mum would like them not to be kept forever." Thomas, who observed the scene a few steps away, felt a lump in his throat. It had been difficult to open that box, to touch Isabella's belongings, to smell again the soft scent of cloves that always accompanied her drawing materials. But seeing Mia's enthusiasm, he knew it was the right decision. "I'll leave you two alone," he said, realizing that his presence might inhibit his daughter. "I have some matters to take care of downtown." those matters were in fact an excuse. Thomas needed space to process the changes that were beginning to happen in his carefully structured life. Since Isabella's departure, he had built a routine that, although painful, was predictable and safe. Now, with Rachel's entry into their lives, he felt the foundations of that safety tremble. While walking the stone streets of Sandpoint, he ended up meeting Charles Edwards, his former editor, who was vacationing in the historic town. "I can't believe it. Thomas Reynolds in the flesh," exclaimed Charles, embracing him with genuine joy. "I thought you had turned into an urban legend, man. 5 years without any news." Thomas smiled, embarrassed. "Life took other paths, Charles." "And what paths were those?" "The literary world still misses you, you know. The Silence of Shells continues to be republished. It's in its 20th edition now." The mention of his last published novel brought a wave of memories. He had finalized the manuscript weeks before Isabella's diagnosis, and the launch coincided with the first treatments. She didn't live to see the book's success. "I don't write anymore," confessed Thomas, as they sat in a cafe in the central square. "I can't." Charles studied his friend with keen eyes. "It's about Isabella, isn't it? You still haven't gotten over it." "It's not something you get over, Charles. It's something you learn to live with." The editor nodded, understanding. "And how is Mia?" "Growing, drawing each day more like her mother. And you? Besides not writing, what have you been doing?" The question caught Thomas unprepared. What had he done in the last 5 years besides raising Mia and lamenting Isabella's absence? His life had been reduced to surviving, day after day, without allowing himself new dreams or possibilities. "I'm beginning to relearn some things," he replied, thinking of Rachel, the seaside cafe, the small changes that were beginning to color his monochromatic existence. Meanwhile, on the cafe's porch, Rachel was surprised by Mia's natural talent. The girl had a keen eye for details and an impressive ability to capture expressions. "I want to draw you," declared Mia, after completing the basic exercises of light and shadow. "Me? Why?" "Because you have an interesting face, sad but with a hidden smile in the corners of your mouth, and your eyes change color depending on the light." The astute observation made Rachel smile. "You see a lot for someone so young." "Mom used to say artists need to see beyond the obvious," Mia began, to sketch Rachel's face with quick, confident strokes. "Dad says that too in his books, that the truth is in the details most people don't notice. Have you read your father's books?" "All of them. Several times." Mia continued drawing, concentrated. "My favorite is September Tides. It's about a lighthouse keeper who falls in love with a marine biologist who studies turtles on the island where he lives. It's sad and beautiful at the same time." "That's my favorite too," confessed Rachel, remembering the nights she had lost herself in the pages of that novel, feeling Thomas's words as company in her own solitude. "Did you know the biologist in the book is inspired by my mom?" Dad never admitted it, but it's obvious. She studied marine biology before becoming an architect. This revelation surprised Rachel. Suddenly, fragments of the novel gained new light in her mind. The protagonist's dedication, her passion for the sea, her peculiar way of seeing the world. She had read, without knowing, a literary portrait of Isabella. "Why did your father stop writing, Mia?" The girl stopped drawing, thoughtful. "I think his stories always came from Mom. She was his muse, as they say in movies. When she left, the stories went with her." The wisdom of that child was disconcerting. Rachel felt a wave of empathy for Thomas. She now understood, more deeply, the emptiness he carried. It wasn't just the loss of his wife, but also the loss of his source of inspiration, of his connection with his own creativity. "And you, why did you stop painting?" Mia's direct question brought Rachel back to the present moment. "It's a complicated story. I'm 9, not 4. I can understand." Complicated stories. Rachel smiled, recognizing the determination in the girl's gaze. "I had an important exhibition in Portland, in the most prestigious gallery in the Pearl District. It was my big chance. On the opening night, a very influential critic said, in front of everyone that my work was derivative and soulless. That I would never be more than a mediocre imitator. And you believed him? Mia seemed genuinely indignant. When someone says something like that in front of many people, and those people start looking at you with pity or disdain, yes, it's hard not to believe. My dad always says critics are people who couldn't create their own works, so they spend their lives judging those of others. Rachel couldn't help but laugh. Your father is a wise man. Sometimes, agreed Mia, returning to her drawing. Other times he's as stubborn as a mule. When Thomas returned hours later, he encountered a scene that left him breathless. Rachel and Mia, side by side, each with their easel, painting the sunset that tinged the waters of Sandpoint Bay golden. There was a harmony between them, a silent understanding that only exists between people who share the same passion. "Dad," exclaimed Mia upon seeing him, "look what we're doing. Rachel taught me to mix colors to get that exact orange of the sky." Thomas approached, observing the two paintings. Mia's was surprisingly good for her age. Vibrant colors, bold brushstrokes, and energy that overflowed from the canvas. As for Rachel's, there was something hypnotic about it. A gentle melancholy that transformed the sunset not just into a natural phenomenon, but into a visual metaphor for the transition between moments in life. "They're beautiful," he said, genuinely impressed. "Both of them." "Rachel is going to teach me to paint people in the next lesson," informed Mia enthusiastically. "She said I can use Mom's paints since you allowed it." Thomas exchanged a look with Rachel, a look loaded with gratitude. Isabella would be happy to see her paints being used again, especially by Mia. "She had a lot of talent," commented Rachel. "From the materials she kept and from Mia's natural talent, I can imagine how skilled she was." "I'll show you." Mia ran inside, returning moments later with a large hardcover book. "This is her portfolio. Dad keeps it in the office." Thomas seemed momentarily uncomfortable, as if that part of his life with Isabella was too intimate to share. But seeing the pride on his daughter's face as she showed her mother's work, he relaxed. Perhaps it was time to let some doors open. The portfolio revealed a talented artist with a unique eye for architecture and nature. There were detailed drawings of historical buildings, sketches of Brazilian fauna and flora, and surprisingly, several portraits of Thomas, some while writing, others sleeping, others simply contemplating the sea. In each of them, one could perceive the love with which they were created. "She observed you as you observe the world in your books," commented Rachel softly, "with attention to the details that reveal the essence." Thomas nodded, unable to speak. Rachel's perception was accurate. Isabella always said that her drawings were her way of writing about him, just as his novels were his way of drawing the world. On the last page of the portfolio, there was something that made Rachel hold her breath. An unfinished sketch, dated a few days before Isabella's passing. It was a portrait of Thomas and Mia together looking at the horizon. Behind them there was the suggested silhouette of a third person, not completely drawn, but clearly present. "She knew she was leaving," said Mia, pointing to the unfinished figure. "But she wanted us to know she would always be with us, even if we couldn't see her." At that moment, something broke inside Thomas. Silent tears began to flow down his face, the first he had allowed in the presence of someone besides Mia since Isabella's funeral. Rachel instinctively placed her hand over his. It was a simple gesture, but loaded with understanding. She said nothing. No words were necessary. That touch said everything. "I understand your pain. I respect your story. I'm here." Mia observed the scene with attentive eyes, capturing in her artist's memory that moment of connection between her father and Rachel. Later, when she was alone in her room, she would transfer to paper that precise instant when something new began to be born from the ashes of an interrupted story. That night, for the first time in years, Thomas didn't appear at the seaside cafe at 1:15 in the morning. Instead, he sat on the porch of his house looking at the stars over Sandpoint Bay and opened a new notebook, not to write letters to Isabella, but to try hesitantly to find words for a new story that, without him realizing it, had already begun. The painting lessons became a weekly ritual that Mia eagerly awaited. The back porch of the seaside cafe transformed into a small improvised studio, with canvases in various stages of completion leaning against the walls, pots of colored water lined up on the railing, and the smell of paint and turpentine permeating the air. Rachel was surprised by how quickly she began to feel pleasure in painting again. It was like rediscovering an almost forgotten language. At first, the words came with difficulty, but soon the visual vocabulary returned, bringing with it a fluency she thought she had lost forever. Thomas, in turn, began to appear more frequently. During the lessons, initially just to pick up Mia, then to observe the progress of both until gradually he stayed for the entire sessions. He sat in a corner with his notebook in his lap, sometimes observing, sometimes writing. "What do you write so much in there?" asked Mia one afternoon while cleaning her brushes. "Notes," replied Thomas evasively. "Impressions." Rachel noticed that he had been disconcerted by the question and quickly changed the subject, proposing a new exercise for Mia. But the curiosity remained. Were they still letters to Isabella? Or was Thomas finally allowing himself to create again? The answer came unexpectedly, through a visit that stirred the quiet routine of Sandpoint. "I can't believe you're living in this backwater." Patricia Vance's strident voice echoed through the seaside cafe on a quiet Wednesday afternoon. "When Charles told me he found you here, I thought he was joking." Thomas, who was having coffee while waiting for Mia to finish her lesson with Rachel, visibly paled upon seeing the woman who entered the establishment like a hurricane. Tall, elegant, with perfectly aligned blonde hair and designer clothes, Patricia completely contrasted with the rustic simplicity of the place. "Patricia," he murmured, rising out of politeness. "What a surprise." "Surprise?" She laughed, throwing her head back in a theatrical gesture. "After ignoring me for 5 years, is that all you have to say?" Rachel and Mia, who were on the back porch, heard the commotion and approached, curious. "Patricia, this is neither the time nor the place," said Thomas, visibly uncomfortable. "And when would it be? You simply disappeared, Thomas, at the height of your career, at the height of our—" She stopped upon noticing Mia's presence. "Oh, this must be your daughter. How she's grown. The last time I saw you, you were just a baby." Mia looked at the stranger with distrust, instinctively, moving closer to Rachel. "This is Patricia Vance," introduced Thomas reluctantly, "an old colleague from the publishing world." "Colleague?" Patricia raised a perfectly delineated eyebrow. "We were much more than colleagues, Thomas and you. Know that. Or have you already forgotten the book launches, the nights we reviewed your manuscripts, the plans we made?" An uncomfortable silence took over the cafe. Mrs. Carter, sensing the tension, approached with a tray. "Would you like some coffee?" "Ma'am, we also have fresh cornbread." "No, thank you," replied Patricia, without taking her eyes off Thomas. "I came just for a quick conversation with our illustrious disappeared writer." Thomas sighed, resigned. "Mia, why don't you and Rachel continue the lesson while I talk with Patricia? We won't be long." "But Dad—" "It's all right, sweetheart. It's just old work matters." Rachel perceived the lie, but gently led Mia back to the porch. The girl, however, seemed disturbed, as if that woman's presence represented a threat to the fragile balance they had built in the last few weeks. "Who is she?" asked Mia, as soon as they were far enough away. "I don't know exactly," replied Rachel honestly, "but she seems to be someone from your father's past, from the time when he still wrote and published." "I didn't like her," declared Mia categorically. "She looks at Dad as if he belonged to her." The perspicacity of the observation didn't surprise Rachel. Mia always captured emotional nuances with impressive precision. "Your father is an admired man, Mia. It's natural that he has people from the past who miss him. Do you miss him too when he's not around?" The direct question, typical of Mia, caught Rachel off guard. Yes, I do," she admitted, realizing it was true. "Your father has a calm presence that's good to have around." Satisfied with the answer, Mia turned her attention back to her painting, a portrait of Mrs. Carter that perfectly captured the kindness in the lady's eyes. Meanwhile, at the most distant table in the cafe, Thomas faced the past he had left, behind in Seattle. 5 years, Thomas. 5 years without a word, said Patricia, in a low but intense voice. Do you know how much that hurt me? How much I worried? I needed to get away from everything, Patricia. From Seattle, from the literary world, from us. I understand that losing Isabella was devastating, but disappearing like that, cutting all ties, she extended her hand across the table, touching his. We had something special starting. You can't deny that. Thomas gently withdrew his hand. We had a professional friendship, Patricia. You were my editor. Anything else you might have imagined. Imagined? She laughed bitterly. So the nights we stayed up late, discussing your manuscripts, the dinners, the plans for your international career, was all that my imagination? We were friends, colleagues, nothing more. And did Isabella know that? The provocative tone made Thomas stiffen. Don't distort things. Isabella trusted me completely, just as I trusted her. Patricia studied Thomas's face, looking for cracks in his determination. I saw the drafts of your new work in Charles's office. He showed me what you sent last week. This revelation made Thomas pale. He had no right. On the contrary, the publisher still has a contract with you, remember? Charles is just fulfilling his role. She paused, calculated. It's good, Thomas. Different from what you wrote before, more mature, denser. But it still has your unmistakable mark. Thomas remained silent, disconcerted by the exposure of something he considered too intimate to share. I started writing again recently, he finally admitted. But they're just fragments, nothing concrete. And I didn't give Charles authorization to show anyone. He's excited, and with reason. Do you know the frenzy that would be Thomas Reynolds's return to the literary scene? Patricia leaned forward, intensifying her gaze. I came here to take you back, Thomas. Back to Seattle, to your career, to me. On the other side of the cafe, Mia observed the interaction with growing concern. Even without hearing the conversation, she could feel the tension between her father and the visitor. She's going to take Dad away, she said abruptly, dropping the brush. What? No, Mia, of course not. Rachel tried to reassure her. Your father would never leave you. It's not that. She wants to take him back to his life before Mom left. To the books, to Seattle, away from Sandpoint. Mia's voice trembled slightly. Away from us. The intuition of the girl was so precise that Rachel felt a tightness in her chest. She herself had perceived the dynamic between Thomas and the visitor, the familiarity, the intimacy of those who shared more than professional conversations. Your father built a life here with you, said Rachel, trying to convince herself as much as Mia. And he seems happy. Now, yes, agreed Mia. With you, with me, with our painting lessons. But what if he misses being famous, seeing his books in the storefronts? The question revealed a deep fear, the fear of not being enough, that the simple life in Sandpoint couldn't compete with the glamour of the literary career Thomas had abandoned. Your father loves you more than anything in the world, Mia, more than fame, more than books, more than any other person. More than you. The direct question, asked with large, sincere eyes, made Rachel choke. Mia, your father and I are just... You like each other, interrupted the girl, with the certainty of children. I see how he looks at you when you're painting. It's the same way he looked at Mom in her drawings. Rachel felt her face burning. It was true that something was growing between her and Thomas, something delicate, undeclared, but palpable. Small gestures, lingering glances, conversations that extended into the early morning at the cafe after closing time. But there was also the weight of his history with Isabella, the responsibility of not further complicating Mia's emotional life. Your father and I are friends who are getting to know each other better, she replied cautiously. And regardless of what happens between us, nothing will change the love he has for you. At the cafe table, Thomas was putting an end to the conversation with Patricia. My life is here now, with Mia. I've started writing again, yes, but at my own pace, on my own terms. And this waitress, asked Patricia with slight disdain. Charles mentioned that you seemed quite close to her. Rachel is not just a waitress. She's a talented artist who is helping Mia develop her gifts. And helping you get over Isabella, apparently. The cruelty of the comment made Thomas rise abruptly. Our conversation is over, Patricia. I appreciate the visit, but I have commitments now. Patricia also stood up, adjusting the expensive purse on her shoulder. Think about what I said, Thomas. Seattle misses you. I miss you. She approached, placing a kiss on his cheek too close to his mouth. I'll be at the Grand Hotel until Sunday. You know where to find me. After Patricia's theatrical exit, the cafe fell into a heavy silence. Thomas remained motionless for a few moments, as if processing what had just happened. Then he walked slowly to the porch, where Rachel and Mia pretended to concentrate on their paintings. Sorry for the interruption, he said, trying to sound casual. Patricia is intense. Was she your girlfriend? Mia's direct question made Thomas choke. No, of course not. She was my editor in Seattle. We worked together. She wanted to be your girlfriend, affirmed Mia with conviction. You could tell by the way she looked at you. Thomas exchanged an embarrassed look with Rachel, who tried to hide a smile. Things are more complicated in the adult world, Mia, he explained, sitting between the two. Sometimes people confuse professional admiration with other types of feelings. Is she going to take you away? The vulnerability in Mia's voice made Thomas's heart ache. Nobody is going to take me anywhere, he guaranteed, hugging his daughter. My place is here with you. And with Rachel, insisted Mia, looking from one to the other. The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken meanings. Rachel felt her face burning again, unable to divert her eyes from Thomas. Yes, he finally answered without breaking eye contact with Rachel. With both of you if she wants. That night, after putting Mia to bed, Thomas did something he hadn't done in years. He went to the bookshelf in the living room and took out a worn copy of September Tides, his most acclaimed novel. He leafed through the pages yellowed by time, rediscovering phrases and paragraphs he had written in another life. On the dedication page, the words he had written for Isabella, "To you, who taught me to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, the eternal in the ephemeral, and love in everything." He closed the book and went to the desk, where a new manuscript was beginning to take shape. The words still came with difficulty, but they came, no longer as letters to an irrecoverable past, but as a new story still unnamed, about new beginnings and second chances. In her room, Mia opened the drawer of her nightstand and took out a yellowed envelope. Inside, a letter she had found months ago, hidden among her mother's books. A letter she had not yet shown to anyone, not even her father. Isabella's delicate handwriting covered the page with words that Mia already knew by heart. My little Mia, when you find this letter, I will probably have already left. There are things in life that we cannot change, no matter how much we wish to. But there is something I want you to know. Your father is the most capable of loving man I have ever known. And that love, now concentrated on you, may one day expand again. When that happens, don't be afraid. Don't feel guilty. The heart has an infinite capacity to grow, and new people in our lives don't diminish the space for those we already love. They just increase the size of the love we are capable of feeling. I will always be with you, not as a shadow of the past, but as a light that blesses the future. With all my love, Mum. Mia carefully folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. Perhaps it was time to share those words with her father. And perhaps, just perhaps, Rachel was exactly the person her mother had foreseen in her final wisdom. Patricia's visit left subtle but noticeable marks on the dynamic that had been established between Thomas, Rachel, and Mia. Like waves after the impact of a stone in the water, circles of uneasiness spread silently. Thomas seemed more thoughtful, sometimes absent, even when physically present. Rachel, in turn, tried to disguise a growing insecurity, questioning herself about her place in the life of this man with such a dense past and a dormant career that by all indications was beginning to awaken. On a Sunday morning, 2 weeks after Patricia's visit, Mia surprised her father with an unusual request. I want to go to the cemetery to visit Mom. Thomas, who was preparing breakfast, almost dropped the cup he was holding. Since Isabella's burial, Mia had never asked to visit her mother's grave. In fact, for a long time, the girl hardly even directly mentioned the maternal absence, as if by not talking about it, she could avoid the reality of the loss. "Are you sure, honey? We can go another day if you prefer. It doesn't have to be today." "It has to be today," insisted Mia, with a determination that admitted no contestation. "It's important." Thomas nodded, respecting his daughter's decision. He arranged to meet. In an hour, time enough for both to prepare emotionally for that visit. Sandpoint Cemetery was located on elevated ground, from where one could glimpse both the historic center and the bay. It was a serene place, with old trees providing shade, and birds that seemed not to care about the solemn nature of the location. Isabella was buried in a simple tomb of white marble, with a plaque where only her name, dates of birth and death, and the phrase she herself had chosen were written, "Love is the only part of us that remains." Thomas watched Mia approach the tomb with decisive steps, carrying a small bouquet of red hibiscus, Isabella's favorite flowers. The girl carefully deposited the flowers and then, to Thomas's surprise, took a yellowed envelope from her bag. "Dad, I need to show you something," she said, extending the envelope. "I found this hidden in the book of American colonial architecture that Mom was studying before leaving." Thomas took the envelope with trembling hands, immediately recognizing Isabella's handwriting. His name was written on the front, with the delicate and precise letter that he had so often admired in notes and notes left around the house. When did you find this?" "A few months ago, but I didn't know if I should show it to you. Now I know I should." Thomas sat on the stone bench near the tomb, feeling his legs weaken. He opened the envelope with reverent care, as one who handles a sacred relic. Inside there were 2 letters, one addressed to him, the other to Mia. "Have you already read yours?" he asked, with a choked voice. Mia nodded. "Many times. That's why I know I need to show you yours now." Thomas unfolded the letter slowly, preparing himself for the impact of encountering, after so long, the words of the woman he had loved deeply. The letter was extensive, written on several pages, with Isabella's handwriting becoming more tremulous throughout the text, evidencing the physical effort it represented in those last days. "My beloved Thomas," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means that the inevitable has happened, and I left earlier than we would have liked. There is so much I would have liked to have said, so many moments I wanted to have lived by your side and with our little Mia, but life, in its sometimes cruel wisdom, has other plans." Thomas felt tears flowing freely down his face as he read the paragraphs in which Isabella recalled special moments of their life together. The first meeting at the seaside cafe when she entered soaked by the rain, the night he read to her excerpts from his first yet unpublished novel, the day they discovered they would be parents, the early mornings they took turns with baby Mia, trying to make her sleep. But it was upon reaching the middle of the letter that Thomas felt as if Isabella were there, speaking directly to him, crossing the abyss of time and absence. "Thomas, my love, you are probably punishing yourself in some way. I know you too well not to know that you have taken all the blame for my condition, that you ask yourself daily if you could have done something different, if you could have saved me somehow. The answer is no. There was nothing to be done. And you need to accept this to move forward, not just for yourself, but mainly for Mia, who will need a full father, not a shadow of a man consumed by guilt and mourning." The words hit Thomas like a punch in the stomach, exposing truths he had tried to ignore for years. Isabella had always had this ability to see through him, to name his most intimate demons. "I also know that you have probably abandoned writing," the letter continued. "That you closed this essential part of who you are, perhaps thinking that your stories were somehow linked to me, that without my presence the words would lose meaning. This deeply saddens me, my love. Your books were never about me. They were about you, about your unique way of seeing the world, of capturing nuances and transforming them into narratives that touch people's hearts. Don't allow this gift to be lost. Don't allow my departure to silence your voice." Thomas had to stop for a few moments, overwhelmed by emotion. Mia approached, sitting beside him on the bench, her small arm embracing her father's shoulders in a surprisingly mature gesture of comfort. When he managed to resume reading, Thomas came across the passage that, he suspected, was the real reason why Mia had decided to show him the letter at that specific moment. And finally, my beloved, when time softens the pain and you begin to feel again that restlessness in your heart, that desire to share more than solitude, don't resist. Don't feel guilty. Don't think you are betraying me or dishonoring my memory. On the contrary, nothing would make me happier than knowing you found someone who awakens again your capacity to love, to smile, to live fully. Someone who can be a female presence in Mia's life, not to replace me. No one will ever occupy my place as a mother, but to bring new types of love and learning to our daughter. I only ask that it be someone of sensitive soul, who understands the art that exists in you and Mia, who respects the past without fearing it. Perhaps you have already found this person when you read this letter. If so, know that you have my blessing, my love. Life is for the living, and you need to live fully for the years we have right. The last pages contained memories, requests, and hopes for Mia's future, guidance on how to help her deal with the maternal absence in different phases of life, and finally, a farewell loaded with love and serenity in the face of the inevitable. When he finished reading, Thomas remained silent for long minutes, the pages trembling slightly in the breeze that came from the sea. Mia, patient, waited for her father to process everything he had just read. "Why did you decide to show me now?" he finally asked, carefully folding the letter. "Because of Rachel," replied Mia, direct as always. "You like her. She likes you. But you two keep looking at each other with guilty faces, as if you were doing something wrong. Mum says here that it's not wrong." The simplicity of the childish logic made Thomas smile through the tears. "Things aren't that simple, Mia." "Yes, they are. Adults complicate everything." She pointed to the letter. "Mum didn't complicate. She understood that life goes on, even when someone we love leaves. She wanted us to be happy." Thomas hugged his daughter, marveling at the wisdom that emanated from that small person he had helped raise. "When did you get so grown up?" "I always was," she replied with a mischievous smile. "You just didn't notice." Upon returning from the cemetery, Thomas felt different, as if an enormous weight had been removed from his shoulders. Isabella's words had granted an absolution that he didn't know he so desperately needed. Not just the permission to move forward romantically, but also to resume his writing, his true vocation. That same afternoon, Mia insisted on going to the seaside cafe, even though it wasn't painting lesson day. Thomas understood his daughter's intention, but didn't contradict her. Perhaps it was really time to be honest with his feelings. They found Rachel on the back porch, working on a new canvas, a portrait of Mia that perfectly captured the duality of the girl, the precocious maturity in her eyes, the childish innocence in her smile. "I wasn't expecting you today," she said, surprised but visibly happy with the unexpected visit. "We went to visit Mom at the cemetery," announced Mia without beating around the bush, "and Dad read an important letter she left." Rachel looked at Thomas, confused by the information and uncertain about how to react. He seemed different, lighter, more present, as if something fundamental had changed within him. "Mia, why don't you go help?" "Mrs. Carter in the kitchen. She was making those chocolate truffles you love," suggested Thomas, needing a moment alone with Rachel. The girl smiled, complicit, and ran inside, leaving the adults alone on the sunny porch. "Is everything all right?" asked Rachel, concerned about the intensity in Thomas's gaze. He approached, taking her hands between his, a simple gesture but loaded with meaning, the first deliberate physical contact he initiated since they met. "Isabella left a letter," he explained, his voice firmer than expected. "A letter that Mia found months ago but only decided to show me today." "What did it say?" Rachel asked softly, realizing that something deeply significant had occurred. "Many things. Memories, advice, hopes for Mia's future, but also," he paused, seeking the right words, "also her blessing for me to move forward, for me to allow myself to love again when I was ready." Rachel's eyes widened slightly, understanding the implications of that revelation. "And are you ready, I mean?" Her voice was almost a whisper. "I'm discovering that I am," replied Thomas, allowing himself a genuine smile. Thanks to you. Thanks to Mia. Thanks to Isabella herself, who even in absence found a way to free me from the guilt that was consuming me. Guilt for what? For being alive, for still being able to feel, for discovering that my heart is still capable of racing when a certain waitress artist enters the room, he replied, with an honesty that surprised them both. Rachel felt her face heating up but didn't look away. I've been feeling something similar, and I also felt guilty, as if I were invading a sacred space. Isabella wrote about that too, about how she hoped I would find someone of sensitive soul who would understand the art that exists in me and in Mia, who would respect the past without fearing it. He gently squeezed Rachel's hands. It seems she foresaw you. I would never try to replace her, you know that, don't you? Neither for you nor for Mia. Of course not, no one could, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for something new, something different, but equally valuable. From the porch door, Mia observed the scene with a satisfied smile, her hands dirty with chocolate, denouncing that Mrs. Carter's truffles had already been duly tested. Beside her, the elderly lady also smiled, her experienced eyes recognizing the birth of something beautiful. Finally, murmured Mrs. Carter, I thought they would take another 6 months, as stubborn as they are. Adults are complicated, agreed Mia, with an exaggerated sigh of exasperation. On the porch, oblivious to the observers, Thomas and Rachel conversed with a new freedom, sharing fears and hopes, establishing the delicate contours of what was beginning to blossom between them. There was no rush, no grandiose expectations, just the mutual understanding that sometimes life offers second chances when we least expect them. I need to show you something, said Thomas, after a long moment of conversation. I haven't told anyone yet, not even Mia, but I've started writing again, for real. A new novel? Asked Rachel, genuinely interested. Yes, it's still in the beginning, but the words are coming back. Different from before, more mature perhaps. It's a story about new beginnings, about finding beauty after the storm. It seems appropriate, commented Rachel with a soft smile. I can't wait to read it. You'll be the first, he promised. But in exchange, I want to see your new canvases. The ones you paint in the early morning when you think no one is watching. Rachel widened her eyes, surprised. How do you know about them? Mrs. Carter told me. She said that after closing time, when everyone leaves, you stay painting until dawn. He smiled, understanding. Night art, creation in solitude. I know that process well. They're just experiments, she evaded. Nothing ready to be seen. Art is never really ready, just abandoned in an acceptable state, quoted Thomas. Leonardo da Vinci said something like that, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, it was Paul Valéry, corrected Rachel, smiling. For a writer, you confuse your references quite a bit. I'm rusty, he admitted, laughing. One more reason to have you around, to keep me culturally updated. The comment, light and casual, carried an implicit promise of shared future, of paths that intertwine. Rachel felt a warmth spread through her chest, not the overwhelming passion of the romances Thomas wrote, but something more sustainable, more mature, the sensation of finding a safe harbor after a long storm. From the other side of the porch, Mia finally decided to interrupt the moment, running to join them with the typical energy of childhood. Have you talked enough? Because I had an amazing idea for our next painting. Thomas and Rachel exchanged a complicit look, both recognizing that whatever path they decided to walk together, Mia would always be the center, the priority, the most precious link. I can't wait to hear it, replied Rachel, making room for the girl to sit between them. And so, under the mild sun of Sandpoint, 3 souls marked by different losses began to glimpse the possibility of a new family configuration, not to replace what was lost, but to honor the past while building, brushstroke by brushstroke, word by word, an unexpected future, but full of promises. The news spread quickly through Sandpoint, as tends to happen in small towns where even the wind seems to whisper secrets. Thomas Reynolds, the reserved man whom everyone knew only as Mia's dedicated father, was actually an acclaimed writer. And more, he was not only writing again, but also romantically involved with Rachel, the waitress artist from the seaside cafe. The speculations ranged from conspiracy theories he was hiding because of some literary scandal to invented romances. They say she's a mysterious muse who appeared out of nowhere to inspire him. The truth, as always, was much simpler and much more complex at the same time. Rachel and Thomas had decided to build their relationship calmly, respecting each other's rhythm and, mainly, Mia's emotional needs. They didn't live together, didn't make grandiose plans for the future, but were present in each other's lives in significant and constant ways. The painting lessons had expanded. Now it wasn't just Mia and Rachel who painted on the back porch of the cafe, but also other Sandpoint residents who, inspired by the artistic renaissance they witnessed, wished to explore their own creativity. Mrs. Carter, observing the success of the initiative, suggested transforming the deactivated storage room next to the cafe into a small community studio. "You could give regular classes," proposed the lady to Rachel as they prepared the morning coffee. "Charge a modest fee. It would be good for you and for the town." Rachel hesitated. The idea of assuming herself again as an artist, of positioning herself as someone capable of teaching and influencing, still awakened deep insecurities. "I don't know if I'm ready for that, Mrs. Carter. It's one thing to help Mia, another to expose myself in that way." "Dear, you already expose yourself every time you put a brush to the canvas. The difference is that now other people could benefit from your talent." The lady paused, adjusting her glasses to better, observed the young woman. "What do you really fear? It's not failure, is it?" Rachel sighed, recognizing the insight of the woman who had become a maternal figure in her life. "I'm afraid of disappointing myself again, of getting excited, believing, and then discovering that I'm not enough." Like what happened? In Portland? Exactly. I built so many dreams, invested everything I had, financially and emotionally, in that exhibition. And it took just one negative criticism for everything to crumble. Mrs. Carter shook her head in disapproval. "And you gave a single man the power to define your value as an artist?" The question hit Rachel like a gentle slap, awakening her to a truth that deep down she already knew. She had allowed the opinion of an arrogant critic to silence her creative voice for years. "When you serve coffee here, Rachel, and someone doesn't like it, do you stop making coffee for all the other customers?" continued the lady, implacable in her simple and accurate logic. "Of course not." "Then why would you do that with your art? Why would you deprive the world, and especially yourself, of something that brings you so much joy just because one person didn't know how to appreciate it?" The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Thomas, bringing Mia for another painting lesson. The girl ran to hug Rachel while animatedly narrating the plans for the day's lesson. "We're painting the sea today. Dad said we can go to Pebble Beach to have the perfect view." Mia's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "And he's going to bring his notebook because he said our painting might inspire a scene in his new book." Thomas approached, smiling at his daughter's excitement. "If it's not too much trouble for you, Rachel, I know we had arranged to paint here today." "I think it's a wonderful idea," she replied, returning the smile. Then, turning to Mrs. Carter, she added, "And when we return, I want to talk about that studio idea. I think you might be right." The lady's smile widened, satisfied. "I usually am, dear. You just take time to realize it." Pebble Beach, with its calm waters and clear sand, offered a perfect view of Sandpoint Bay. They set up the easels in the shade of palm trees, with the blue-green sea in front and the mountains in the background, creating a scene of perfect balance between water, land, and sky. While Rachel helped Mia prepare the paints, teaching her to mix the exact tones to capture the nuances of the tropical sea, Thomas observed the scene, absorbing every detail. The gentle wind that messed up the hair of both, the concentration on his daughter's face, the patience and delicacy in Rachel's gestures. In his notebook, the words flowed with the ease he hadn't experienced in years. "There are people who enter our lives not to fill voids, but to show that certain spaces were never really empty, just dormant, waiting for the right touch to awaken." Elliot observed Laura teaching his daughter to capture the sea in paint and canvas, and understood finally that the heart was not a container of limited capacity, but a universe in constant expansion. What are you thinking about? Rachel's voice interrupted his thoughts. She had approached silently, leaving Mia concentrated on her work. About how life is unpredictable, replied Thomas, closing the notebook. 3 months ago, I considered myself just a widowed father trying to raise his daughter as best as possible, living with ghosts and regrets. Now I'm writing again, seeing Mia flourish as an artist and, encouraged Rachel when he hesitated, and rediscovering parts of myself that I thought were lost forever, thanks to you. Rachel sat beside him on the sand, their hands finding each other naturally. I think we did that for each other. You also helped me rediscover the artist I had silenced within me. Speaking of which, Thomas hesitated briefly. Charles called me yesterday. The publisher is officially interested in my new manuscript. They want me to go to Seattle next week to discuss details. A shadow quickly passed over Rachel's face. That's wonderful, Thomas. You deserve this recognition. But he knew her well enough to perceive the unexpressed concern. There is no but. I'm genuinely happy for you. She paused, carefully choosing her words. I just wonder how it will be when you return to the spotlight. If Sandpoint will continue to be enough, if we will continue to be enough, he completed, gently squeezing her hand. Rachel, I understand your fear, especially after Patricia's visit. But I need you to understand something. I'm not going back to writing to recover fame or success. I'm writing because, thanks to you and Mia, I rediscovered that stories are my way of processing the world. And this book, more than any other I've ever written, is about finding beauty in the unexpected, about reconstruction after loss. It's about us, in a way. Thomas's words calmed part of Rachel's insecurities, but one question persisted. And Patricia? She'll be there, won't she? Probably. She's still senior editor at the company. Thomas kept his gaze steady on hers. But what existed between us, or what she imagined existed, belongs to the past. My present and I hope my future are here, with Mia and with you, if you so desire. Before Rachel could respond, they were interrupted by Mia, who ran in their direction, holding her still wet canvas. I finished. Come see. The painting was surprising. Mia had captured not just the physical landscape of the bay, but an emotional quality that transcended technique. There was joy in those brushstrokes, a celebration of life that moved both Thomas and Rachel. It's incredible, Mia, praised her father, genuinely impressed. You're becoming a true artist. Like Mom? Asked the girl with a mixture of hope and insecurity. Not like her, replied Thomas carefully. Your mother had her own style, her own voice, and you're developing yours, equally special, equally valuable. Mia smiled, satisfied with the answer. Then, with that disconcerting frankness typical of children, she asked, Were you talking about the trip to Seattle, right? Can I go too? Thomas and Rachel exchanged surprised looks. How do you know about the trip? Asked Thomas. I heard you, talking on the phone last night, and then I cried a little because I thought you were going away like the blonde lady said, but then I remembered Mum's letter and realized it was silly. The maturity with which Mia faced her fears always surprised the adults around her. Thomas hugged his daughter, moved by her resilience. Of course you can come with me. In fact, I was thinking we could turn this into a small trip. I have the meeting at the publisher, but afterward we can visit museums, galleries. Is Rachel coming too? Interrupted Mia, looking hopefully from one adult to the other. It was Rachel's turn to be surprised. Me? I don't know if it would be appropriate, Mia. It's a professional commitment of your father and... Please, insisted the Yorker girl. It would be perfect. We could visit that famous gallery in the Pearl District that you always talk about. And maybe you could show your paintings to the people there. Mia's enthusiasm was contagious, but it also touched on sensitive points for Rachel. The idea of returning to Portland, of revisiting the scene of her greatest professional disappointment, was intimidating. On the other hand, the prospect of doing it alongside Thomas and Mia, with their support and affection, offered an opportunity to exorcise old ghosts. I think it's an excellent idea, commented Thomas, noticing Rachel's hesitation. But only if you feel comfortable, of course. Rachel looked at the two of them. the man who had unexpectedly brought new light to her life, and the girl who had conquered her heart with her precocious wisdom and natural talent. She felt an impulse of courage that she hadn't experienced in years. "You know what? Yes, I will. It's time to face some fears." Mia's smile illuminated the beach. "It's going to be the best trip ever. And when we come back, we can make that studio that Mrs. Carter talked about. She told me about her plan." "Of course she did," laughed Rachel, already accustomed to the efficient communication network that was established around Mia. "It seems everyone is conspiring to make me go back to painting seriously." "It's because you're good at it," replied Mia with simplicity. "And when people are good at something that makes them happy, they should do it all the time." "The way you talk, it seems so simple," commented Rachel. "And it is," insisted the girl. "Adults complicate everything." That night, after taking Mia home, Thomas returned to the seaside cafe. It was his usual time, 1:15 in the morning, but this time he wasn't coming just for his solitary ritual. He was coming to finally see Rachel's night paintings, those she created in the silent hours between the cafe's closing and dawn. She was waiting for him on the back porch, nervous but determined. In the center of the space, covered by a cloth, was a large canvas, larger than any they had used in the lessons with Mia. "I haven't shown this to anyone," said Rachel when Thomas approached. "Not even to Mrs. Carter, who respects my privacy enough to never come in here after I close the cafe." "I feel honored by your trust," he replied, understanding the importance of the moment. With a decided gesture, Rachel removed the cloth, revealing the painting. Thomas felt his breathing falter for an instant. The canvas showed the interior of the seaside cafe during the early morning, illuminated only by the soft light of some lamps. At the corner table by the window was he himself, writing in his notebook with a cup of coffee and a plate with cornbread in front of him. There was an almost magical quality in the way light and shadows intertwined, creating an atmosphere of deep introspection, of silent intimacy. But the most impressive was the expression captured on his face, a complex mixture of melancholy, concentration, and surprisingly, hope. "Is this how you see me?" asked Thomas, moved. "This is how you are," replied Rachel, "at least in the early mornings when you think no one is observing." There were other canvases leaning against the wall, which Rachel revealed one by one. Mia concentrated on her drawings, Mrs. Carter kneading bread dough in the cafe's kitchen, sandpoints, port at dawn, with fishermen preparing their boats, and finally a self-portrait that showed Rachel in front of a mirror, half of her face illuminated, half in shadows. "These are my night confessions," she explained, "my way of processing what I feel, what I see, what I live." "They're extraordinary," said Thomas, genuinely impressed. "You have a rare gift, Rachel. The ability to capture not just the appearance of people and places, but their essence." "It's the same thing you do with words," she observed. "Perhaps that's why we understand each other so well. We speak different languages, but we're expressing the same truths." Rachel approached, taking his hands between hers. "I'm afraid of the trip to Seattle, Thomas. Afraid of revisiting that place of failure and humiliation. But I want to go. For you, for Mia, and especially for myself." "Seattle will no longer be a place of failure for you," he promised. "This time, you won't be alone." That night, sitting on the porch under Sandpoint's starry sky, Thomas shared with Rachel the initial chapters of his new novel. It was a story about a photographer who had lost his sight and a painter who could no longer see colors, both helped by a child who taught them to see the world in new and unexpected ways. "It's our story," realized Rachel upon hearing the excerpts. "Transformed, reinvented, but still recognizable. All fiction is born from truth," replied Thomas, "and some truths are too beautiful not to be told." When the sky began to lighten, announcing dawn, both remained on the porch, hands intertwined, contemplating the horizon that gradually transformed. There was no rush, no necessary words, just the shared certainty that sometimes endings are just disguised new beginnings, and the most beautiful stories are those that take us completely by surprise. Seattle received the three travelers from Sandpoint with its usual chaotic indifference. The skyscrapers, the incessant traffic and the accelerated rhythm of the metropolis drastically contrasted with the tranquility of the historic town they had left behind. For Mia, it was an exciting adventure. For Thomas, an inevitable return to the world he had abandoned. For Rachel, a necessary confrontation with ghosts of the past. They stayed in a hotel in Fremont, an elegant and tree-lined area that offered a respite amid the urban hustle. Thomas's meeting at the publisher was scheduled for the next morning, which gave them time for a small exploration of the city. "I want to see where Rachel made her paintings before," declared Mia as they walked through Discovery Park. "Can we go to your old studio?" Rachel hesitated. Her studio had been a tiny back room in a boarding house in the Pearl District, improvised as a workspace. After the disastrous exhibition, she had hastily abandoned the place, leaving behind materials, unfinished canvases, and, in a way, a part of herself. "I don't have the studio anymore, Mia," she explained softly. "When I decided to return to Sandpoint, I left everything behind." "Everything?" The girl's eyes widened, incredulous. "Even the paintings?" "Especially the paintings," confirmed Rachel, feeling a pang of regret she hadn't expected. "At the time, it seemed the only thing to do. I wanted distance from everything that reminded me of failure." "But what if some paintings were good? What if people just didn't know how to see?" Mia's innocent question carried a wisdom that deeply affected Rachel. How many potentially valuable works had she abandoned in her impulse to flee? How many expressions of her soul had she disowned just because an external voice had devalued them? "I think I made a mistake," admitted Rachel, looking at Thomas, who followed the conversation in understanding silence. "I should have brought at least some, to remember who I was, where I came from." "Can we go see if they're still there?" suggested Mia, hopeful. "Maybe the person who got the room kept them." Thomas gently intervened. "Mia, it's probably been a long time. The chances of the painting still being there are small." "But what if they are?" insisted the girl, with that optimistic stubbornness that was her trademark. "It doesn't hurt to try." And so, instead of visiting renowned museums or prestigious galleries as they had planned, they found themselves walking through the colorful streets of the Pearl District in search of the old boarding house where Rachel had lived. The bohemian neighborhood had changed considerably in recent years. Hipster cafes and concept stores had replaced many of the simpler and more authentic establishments. But, to Rachel's surprise, Mrs. Winter's boarding house was still there, with its faded, yellow facade and the same discreet sign. "I can't believe it," she murmured, stopping in front of the three-story building. "I thought it would have been demolished by now to make way for some modern building." "Let's go in." Mia was already pulling Rachel's hand toward the door. The reception remained practically identical. The same dark wooden counter, the same exuberant plants in the corners, and to Rachel's complete astonishment, the same gray-haired lady behind the counter, Mrs. Winters in person, now visibly older, but with the same lively eyes and welcoming smile. "May I help you?" asked the lady, adjusting her glasses to better see the visitors. "Mrs. Winters," Rachel's voice came out hesitant. "It's me, Rachel Newman. I lived here a few years ago, in the back room that I used as a studio." The lady's expression immediately transformed, lighting up with recognition and genuine joy. "Rachel, my goodness, it's really you. I thought I'd never see you again after that hasty departure." The two women embraced, to the surprise of Thomas and Mia, who observed the scene with curiosity. "Mrs. Winters, these are Thomas and Mia," introduced Rachel, moved by the unexpected reunion. "Very special friends from Sandpoint, where I live now." "Very pleased to meet you," replied the lady, studying the two with a perceptive look. Then, turning to Rachel, "So, you returned to your hometown. I always said you had a small-town soul. Remember, even when you tried to convince yourself otherwise." Rachel laughed, surprised by the accuracy of the observation. "You always knew me better than I knew myself. And what brings you here today? I doubt it's just to visit a curious old landlady." "We came for Rachel's paintings," announced Mia, unable to contain herself. "The ones she left when she went away. Do they still exist?" The direct question made Mrs. Winters look attentively at the girl, then at Rachel, with an intrigued expression. "You didn't receive my letters." "Letters?" Rachel frowned, confused. "What letters?" "I sent at least 5 letters to the address you left in Sandpoint," explained the lady, visibly surprised. "When you left so suddenly, leaving everything behind, I knew you were in a difficult moment. I kept your things, thinking you would return when the dust settled. When I realized you wouldn't return, I tried to make contact." Rachel felt a tightness in her chest. The address she had left was of her parents' old house, sold after their passing. She had never returned to check if there were any correspondences. "I never received anything," she admitted, suddenly feeling dizzy with the implications. "You mean my paintings are all stored in the storage room," confirmed Mrs. Winters with a satisfied smile. "All 27 canvases, the sketches, even that unfinished series about the farmer's market that you loved. I didn't have the heart to get rid of anything. Something told me that one day you would return to get them." The tears came without warning, blurring Rachel's vision. The idea that her works, expressions of an entire phase of her life, had not been lost, that someone had considered them valuable enough to preserve for years, was overwhelming. Can I see them?" she asked with a choked voice. "Of course, they're yours after all." Mrs. Winters led the trio to a storage room at the back of the boarding house, a small but organized room where, carefully leaned against the wall, were Rachel's, canvases protected by cloths and bubble wrap. "I kept everything as it was," explained the lady. "I just took the liberty of cataloging and properly protecting them. My nephew is a restorer at the Seattle Art Museum, you know. He advised me on how to preserve them correctly." One by one, the canvases were unwrapped, revealing an artistic past that Rachel had tried to forget. They were intense, emotional works, technically imperfect in some aspects, but loaded with a raw honesty that was impossible to ignore. Urban scenes of Seattle, portraits of strangers found on the streets, still lifes that transformed everyday objects into studies of light and shadow. "They're beautiful," commented Mia, observing with the eyes of an artist in formation. "Different from the ones you make now, but equally special." "The girl is right," agreed Thomas, studying the canvases with genuine admiration. "There's an authenticity here, a sincere search. Whoever couldn't see the value in this didn't deserve to evaluate your work." Rachel touched each canvas with reverence, reconnecting with the artist she had been, now seeing with more mature eyes both the flaws and qualities of her previous work. Instead of the shame she expected to feel, she found a strange peace, the sensation that a circle was finally closing. "There's something else," said Mrs. Winters, taking from a large folder a yellowed newspaper clipping. "It came out in the art section of the Seattle Times about 3 months after you left." The clipping showed a devastating critique of the exhibition that had destroyed Rachel's confidence, but it wasn't from the influential critic who had publicly humiliated her. It was a response, written by a respected name in the artistic milieu, defending Rachel's work and harshly criticizing the myopic arrogance of the first reviewer. The young artist, Rachel Newman, so prematurely discarded by certain supposedly enlightened sectors of the Seattle critics, demonstrates in her work a promise that only eyes truly attentive to innovation can recognize, read Thomas aloud. Her sudden departure from the artistic scene represents a significant loss that we hope is only temporary. "Why did I never see this?" asked Rachel, stunned by the discovery. "As I said, I tried to find you," replied Mrs. Winters. "After this, there were a few more articles and even a gallery owner who came looking for you. Helena something, I don't remember the last name. Helena Morgan." Rachel almost choked on pronouncing the name. "From Root Gallery." "That's the one. She came personally, very interested in your work, left her card and everything, but since I couldn't get in touch with you." Thomas and Rachel exchanged significant looks. Helena Morgan was one of the most respected gallery owners in the country, known for her unerring eye for emerging talents and her humanized approach to contemporary art. "Is she still with the gallery on Pine Street?" asked Rachel, feeling her heart accelerate. "Yes, expanded even. Now she occupies the entire building, from what I know." Mia, who attentively followed the conversation, pulled on the sleeve of Rachel's blouse. We have to go there. Today. Show that you've gone back to painting and are better than ever." The girl's excitement was contagious, but Rachel hesitated. "It's not that simple, Mia. We can't just show up without warning and—" "Why not?" interrupted Thomas, surprising her. "The meeting at the publisher is only tomorrow. We have the rest of the day free. The worst that can happen is she's not available, and in that case, we'll schedule for another time." There was a gleam in Thomas's eyes that Rachel recognized. It was the same she saw when he talked about his new novel, a mixture of enthusiasm and determination that made it difficult to resist. "You're crazy," she laughed, shaking her head. "Completely crazy." "Is that a yes?" asked Mia, hopeful. "It's a let's try," conceded Rachel, feeling a wave of courage she hadn't experienced in years. After an emotional conversation with Mrs. Winters, in which they arranged to return the next day to resolve how they would transport the works to Sandpoint, the trio headed to Root Gallery, located on a tree-lined street in the Pearl District. The space had in fact expanded considerably since the last time Rachel had visited it. What was once a small alternative gallery now occupied an entire building, with multiple exhibition spaces, a cultural cafe on the ground floor, and a bookstore specializing in art. "Take a deep breath," advised Thomas, noticing Rachel's nervousness, as they approached the reception. The receptionist, a young woman of efficient appearance, informed them that Helena Morgan was in a meeting with artists for the next collective exhibition, but could receive them briefly in about 20 minutes, if they didn't mind waiting. "Of course we'll wait," replied Mia, before the adults could say anything. "We've come from very far away to talk to her." The young woman smiled, charmed by the girl's resourcefulness. "And what would be the subject?" "My friend Rachel Newman," announced Mia, pointing to an increasingly embarrassed Rachel, "is an amazing artist who Helena looked for a few years ago but couldn't find. Now she's back, painting better than ever, and has wonderful works to show." The receptionist looked more attentively at Rachel, then consulted something on her computer. Her eyes widened slightly. "Rachel Newman? The one from the Urban Fragments series from 2016? "Yes," confirmed Rachel, surprised to be remembered. "Please, wait a moment." The young woman quickly rose and disappeared through a side door. Less than 5 minutes later, a middle-aged woman with short grey hair and red-framed glasses appeared in the lobby, looking directly at Rachel with an expression of astonishment and joy. "Rachel Newman! I can't believe it!" exclaimed Helena Morgan, approaching with open arms. "I looked for you everywhere. Where have you been hiding all these years?" "In Sandpoint," replied Rachel, still stunned by the warm reception. "Working in a cafe, rediscovering my path." "And painting," added Mia, determined not to leave this important detail out. "Beautiful things." Helena smiled at the girl, then looked interrogatively at Thomas. "And you must be Thomas Reynolds," he introduced himself, "Rachel's friend and father of this little arts defender." The name seemed to awaken something in Helena's memory. "Thomas Reynolds, the writer of September Tides." "The same," he confirmed, surprised to be recognized. "Fascinating." Helena looked from one to the other, as if connecting invisible dots. Two talents who disappeared from the radar for years, reappearing together. That would make quite a story. Then, turning specifically to Rachel, "Please, tell me you brought photos of your current work." Rachel hesitated. "Actually, no, it was a last-minute decision to come here, but I rediscovered my old works today at the boarding house where I lived. Mrs. Winters kept everything." Emily Winters, that blessed woman. Helena seemed increasingly excited. "You know, we kept in touch. She would always let me know if someone appeared asking about you or your works." "I had no idea. Come, let's talk in my office. I cancelled the rest of my meeting as soon as I knew you were here. Some things are priority." Helena's office was a cozy and eclectic space, with walls covered with works by emerging artists, many books and a large work table full of catalogues and projects. While Mia explored, fascinated, the art objects scattered around the environment, the adults talked about Rachel's years of absence from the artistic scene. That destroying criticism from August Miller was the most unfair thing I witnessed in Years, commented Helena, serving coffee to the visitors. Many of us spoke out against it, but the damage was already done. When I finally got your contact and went looking for you, you had already left. I was in a very fragile place emotionally, admitted Rachel. That exhibition represented everything to me. When it failed so publicly, but it didn't fail, interrupted Helena, emphatic. The opinion of one bitter and outdated critic doesn't define the value of a work. Do you know how many now established artists he destroyed in their early career years? It's almost an honor to be on that list. Thomas smiled, gently squeezing Rachel's hand under the table. That's exactly what I said. And did you continue painting in Sandpoint? Asked Helena, leaning forward with genuine interest. Not for a long time, confessed Rachel. I stopped completely for almost 2 years, until I met Mia and began giving lessons to her. It was like rediscovering a lost part of myself. She makes incredible paintings now, intervened Mia, who had returned to their side, especially in the early morning when she thinks no one is watching. Scenes from the cafe, portraits, Sandpoint Sea, they're different from the old ones. More mature, completed Thomas. More serene, but equally intense, Helena observed the interaction between the three with growing fascination. I need to see these works. When are you returning to Sandpoint? The day after tomorrow, replied Thomas. I have a meeting at the publisher tomorrow morning to discuss my new novel, and then we plan to spend another day visiting some museums with Mia. Perfect, declared Helena, making an instantaneous decision. I'll go with you to Sandpoint this weekend. I need to see your current work in the environment where it was created, Rachel. And if it's as good as I imagine, I want to propose an exhibition. An exhibition? Rachel's voice faltered. But I don't even know if I'm ready to... You are, affirmed Thomas and Mia in unison, making everyone laugh. Besides, continued Helena, with a determined gleam in her eyes, I have a project for next semester. Rebirths, Artists Who Returned from Silence. A collective exhibition about creators who, for various reasons, abandoned their art for significant periods and then returned, transformed by the experience. Your story is perfect for this context. And the old paintings? Asked Rachel, still trying to process everything that was happening. The ones Mrs. Winters kept? We can include some, create a dialogue between your past and present work. Show the evolution, the journey. Helena paused, studying Rachel's expression. But only if you want, of course. The decision is entirely yours. Rachel looked at Thomas, then at Mia, finding in both gazes the same unconditional support, the same confidence in her talent. She took a deep breath, feeling a certainty grow within her, the certainty that she was, finally, ready to reclaim her place as an artist. I want to, she declared with a firmness that surprised herself. I want to show where I've been, where I went, and where I am now. Excellent, Helena clapped her hands, enthusiastic. Sandpoint, here we come. 6 months later, the seaside cafe was unrecognizable. The tables had been temporarily removed to make space for exhibition panels where dozens of Rachel's paintings were displayed. The small establishment, transformed into an improvised gallery, overflowed with visitors. Local residents, tourists, art critics, and journalists who had traveled especially for the event. The exhibition, Sandpoint Dawn's Rachel Newman's Rebirth, was the most talked about event of the artistic circuit that season. The story of the waitress artist who rediscovered her vocation after years of self-imposed silence had captured the public's imagination, especially when intertwined with the parallel story of the writer who had also found his voice again. For it wasn't just Rachel who was celebrating a triumphant return that night. At a special table, copies of Morning Cafe, Thomas Reynolds' new novel, were being autographed by the author, forming a line that extended down the street. The book, inspired by his own journey of reconstruction after loss, had been acclaimed by critics as his most mature and moving work. Mia circulated through the space with ease, wearing an official artist's assistant badge, proudly explaining techniques and inspirations to interested visitors. In a special corner of the exhibition, 3 of her canvases were also displayed, a tribute from Rachel to the precocious talent that had helped awaken her own dormant creativity. Mrs. Carter, wearing her best dress and a radiant smile, received guests with small delicacies inspired by the flavors that had accompanied Rachel's creative early mornings, including, of course, the iconic cornbread that had united so many destinies under her roof. In the center of the exhibition, a special installation attracted particular attention: the recreation of the corner table of the cafe, with the chair where Thomas sat every early morning, the open notebook, the coffee cup, and on the wall behind, the first painting Rachel had made of him, without him knowing. Beside it, handwritten pages of the novel that had begun to be born in those silent early mornings. At a certain point in the night, when the celebration was at its peak, Thomas finally managed to steal a few minutes alone with Rachel, leading her to the back porch, the place where everything had truly begun. "Are you happy?" he asked, observing the illuminated face of the woman who had transformed his life in ways he had never imagined possible. "More than I could express," she replied, leaning back in his embrace as they contemplated the starry sky over Sandpoint Bay. "Not just for the exhibition, for the recognition, but for everything that brought us here." "Including the difficult parts?" "Especially the difficult parts," confirmed Rachel. "Without them, perhaps we would never have really found each other, neither others nor ourselves." Thomas nodded, understanding perfectly. "Do you know what Mia told me this morning? That Isabella would be proud of all of us." "She would be," agreed Rachel, with the quiet certainty of someone who had learned to live harmoniously with the presence of an absence. "She brought us together, in a way." The sound of hurried footsteps interrupted the intimate moment. Mia appeared on the porch, eyes shining with excitement. "You need to come back inside now. Helena just announced she's taking the exhibition to Seattle next month, and then to Portland. And there are journalists wanting to interview you two together. And Dad's editor wants to talk about transforming our community studio into a social project with sponsorship from the publisher." Thomas and Rachel exchanged amused looks at the girl's overflowing enthusiasm. "We're coming, little entrepreneur," joked Thomas, stroking his daughter's hair. "We were just having a moment of peace before returning to the whirlwind." "Peace? You'll have plenty of time for later," declared Mia with the characteristic impatience of youth. "Now is the time to celebrate. You deserve it. We deserve it." Hand in hand, the three returned to the party. On the way, they passed the table, where the exhibition's guest book was open. Rachel stopped briefly to read some comments, moved by the words of appreciation and recognition. On the last filled page, one message in particular caught her attention. Written in elegant handwriting, it simply said, "Love is the only part of us that remains, and art is the purest form of love. Thank you for not giving up on either." There was no signature, just a small drawing of a red hibiscus, Isabella's favorite flower. Rachel showed the message to Thomas, who read it in silence. Teary-eyed, then with a serene smile, he gently kissed Rachel's forehead and held Mia's hand. "Let's go," he said, guiding the two women who had recolored his life. "We have many stories to tell, many canvases to paint, and a whole life ahead to do it." That night, as the moon of Sandpoint illuminated the bay with its silvery light, three once solitary hearts celebrated the most beautiful of discoveries, that sometimes endings are just the beginning of even more extraordinary stories. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Thomas, Rachel, and Mia has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about new beginnings and second chances. Find it here by clicking on the left. If you enjoyed this narrative, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories